Well, good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the journey from program to strategy, organizationally and professionally. I'm Beth Steinhorn. I'm so pleased to be hosting this panel discussion on behalf of Better Impact today, tracing this journey from program to strategy when it comes to volunteer engagement. Why talk about this journey from program to strategy? We know that from research, from lots of practical experience, that when volunteer engagement is viewed as a strategy rather than a program that's simply nice to have, but rather a mission critical strategy, it's more impactful. It helps organizations sustain, adapt, and grow. And yet we also know that that doesn't happen by accident. We need, as leaders of volunteers, as leaders of nonprofits, to map a journey from a program to a true strategic resource. And it's not always easy to figure out what that map is to navigate that journey. Fortunately, as a consultant, I get to work with leaders all across North America and sometimes beyond who have traversed this journey, who have broken trail and really navigated very successfully a shift from their organizations, maybe engaging a lot of volunteers and doing it well, but viewing it ultimately as a program to truly viewing it as a strategy. And so I was thrilled to be able to invite two of my colleagues here today and do a little group interview, a panel discussion, so you can hear their experiences, their advice on how to do that. To help you out as well, we will be sending you as a follow-up a handout that might be able to be useful as you kind of process what you heard today, to help you think about what did you hear that really resonates as a useful way to make this shift in your own organization? Wherever you are on that spectrum from program to strategy, what might help you tip the scales and move a little further? Maybe it's creating an internal vision for strategic engagement. Maybe it's piloting areas with certain departments. Maybe it's something else, and there will be plenty of ideas that you'll get from my esteemed colleagues, whom I'd love to introduce. Let me take a brief moment and introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask our wonderful panelists to introduce themselves. So if I didn't already, I should say I'm Beth Steinhorn. I'm president of VQ Volunteer Strategies. We work with organizations, as I said, across North America and sometimes beyond to help them do exactly this, make this journey through training, through consulting, through planning, through piloting initiatives. And I'm so lucky that I get to work as a consultant with leaders like our panelists today. Well, our panelists today are unparalleled. I get to work with leaders who aspire to be as effective and inspiring as our panelists today. So I'd love to turn it over to our panelists and ask, maybe Wendy, if you could start, briefly share a bit about your organization and how, just a tidbit about your work and your tenure in your role. So Wendy, do you want to start? And then we'll turn it over to Sarah.
Sure, I'll be happy to. And thanks for the great introduction. My head is now ginormous. Thank you. I am Wendy Johnson. I am the Volunteer Resources and Internship Coordinator, leader, pick a name, at the Indianapolis Public Library. I've been at the library for 10 years, so you're going to hear a lot about the journey here at the library. I have been in the volunteer leadership profession for over 20 years and have been lots of different places. So in food insecurity, I've been at United Way, domestic violence shelters. I've been a lot of different organizations. And all of that helps build that reference that I have for making a strategy in our library system.
Thanks, Wendy. Sarah?
Hello, everyone. I am Sarah Sukhram. I am the Volunteer Services Manager in Pasco County, Florida. So from a geography standpoint, that's just north of the Tampa Bay area. I have been with the county going on almost 8 years now, excuse me, and For a volunteer services manager, that means I oversee our public services branch of volunteers. So that entails our animal services, our libraries, our parks and recreation and natural resources, senior services, support services, and we're going to be bringing on here shortly our veteran services to have volunteers as well.
Thank you. And just to make this a little more personal and much more conversational, we're actually going to be radical and stop sharing our slides and be able to actually look at each other bigger on our screens. God, goodness help us. And that's also a friendly reminder to put your questions. I know we're not quite there yet, but put your questions in the Q&A and in the chat and we will try and intersperse them where relevant. So thank you both for introducing yourselves. Can you share a bit about how the volunteer engagement, like what does volunteer engagement look like at your organizations? And maybe we'll start again with Wendy here, and then we'll go to Sarah again, and we'll change it up. So share a little bit about someone's asking, could we see the panelists as well? You can set, I believe, you can set your own views of whether you're looking at just speakers or who are being highlighted or everyone. I think you should be able to do that on your own dashboard in terms of viewing. So hopefully that'll work. If not, whoever's speaking will get highlighted. Okay, so Wendy, talk a little bit about what volunteer engagement looks like at the library and how your approach has shifted in your time with Indianapolis Public Library.
All right, so the Indianapolis Public Library has currently in the realm of 500 to 600 volunteers. We have 25 branch locations. I'm very lucky that I can decentralize my volunteer leadership. So I am like the central location for all things risk management and HRE functions. And then in each of our branches and departments that host volunteers, I have volunteer coordinators. And those volunteer coordinators are the frontline face-to-face with our volunteers that come through the onboarding process. So I'm kind of like the HR for unpaid workforce. Do you want me to talk about the two different things in my world? I have corporate volunteers. Initially, when I started with the library, corporate volunteers and corporate groups were not a thing. They were a scary monster. And my experience in other organizations told me that, man, oh man, we could use these corporate groups and we could really build some wonderful partnerships to help support our foundation, to help support our branch locations. So my initial instinct was, let's talk about corporate volunteerism. And then the second part of my role has always been about individual volunteers, much like you guys. The individual volunteers were kind of scattered throughout the locations. We didn't have a consistency. So fortunately, over the time frame that I've been with the library, we now engage individual volunteers at every location. Yay! Which was one of my big goals. Strategically, I thought it was important that everyone have a volunteer so they understood how the value of volunteers can help them. So I've worked in two areas. I'm working really hard now on a third, and that is an internship program. And we are going to use the word program here, even though you guys know I probably will go on a rant about words. This truly is a program versus volunteer engagement. So there's my 2 cents about words. Sarah?
Yeah, so just briefly to talk about kind of the engagement currently is, or I guess historically, I've been in this role coming up to 9 months now, and previously every department kind of did their own thing with volunteers. So everyone had their own version of what volunteering should look like. And so that could have been, well, we do in-person orientations, or we have an online orientation, or we have this form and we have this waiver and we have this pledge. And I'm sure some of you on the call can relate that you can go down very quickly a path of all the different forms and the different terms. And to Wendy's point with words, my goodness, the different titles that we even have in the industry. And so that was kind of how the county initially started with volunteering, is that everything is separated, and we didn't really have a common voice, and there wasn't really a common advocate for what volunteering should look like and how to benefit the county. And so that's when I came into play. And I know we'll probably talk about a little bit of that journey later. I could go on and on about how excited I am, but coming from the government standpoint, it's really cool to see the shift happening.
Nice. Nice. Thank you. So so speaking of shift, at what point, Sarah, and I know part of this is when, the answer is when they created this job that you were elevated to, but at what point did you or maybe the county realize that even more was possible if they engaged volunteers differently or in a more centralized way? Like, what inspired that aha moment?
Absolutely. So to your point, yeah, my role really, our assistant county administrator who oversees public services was watching the power of volunteers at our animal services department. And that's where I was prior. I was the volunteer and foster care coordinator for our municipal animal services. And we were a small and mighty group, but the efficiency in what we were able to do kind of led to other things. We have volunteers that created our best practices, that wrote some of our SOPs in our clinic. We had volunteers that through their connections were able to help with our nonprofit friends group for funding and donations in the philanthropy journey. And so having that moment where our assistant county administrator, I was very fortunate to have earned the Employee of the Year for the county award. And so when they came to, yeah, thank you. When they came to congratulate me, I strategically had some of my core volunteers there for
So
that
smart.
presentation. And I basically lined them up and I said, this is my moment. This is my elevator pitch. And that's when I really took that time to leverage the assistant county administrator who already was seeing some of that momentum. And she really supported with the county administrator to create a role of volunteer services for the branch. And so this is a first time that we've had volunteer services for the branch level to kind of standardize where it makes sense. Obviously, we're going to have a little bit different training for a library volunteer to an animal services, but to create those best practices at the branch level and really elevate what that looks like across for our departments, for our citizens.
Nice. Thank you. Wendy, what was the aha moment or tipping point at Indianapolis Public Library?
Well, there were two things. During COVID, we had lots of time on our hands to reevaluate things. And at the branch library level, we were doing a lot of thought about what's the safety of our patrons, especially our younger folks. And we developed and implemented what's called a youth protection policy. And the youth protection policy says there has to be 2 unrelated adults in any program where youth are involved, which if you've been in a library, youth are involved in all of them. So it became a real burden on our staff because we didn't have staff that we could pull 2 people off of desk or out of circulation to sit in a room while a program was happening where there were youth. So I raised my hand and said, could volunteers be those people? And of course, the answer was, oh my gosh, that's a great solution. Yay for volunteers. So that was the first really big tipping point because that engaged all of my branches, had the same problem. They had the same concern. And now we have this wonderful solution that was super easy for them to implement. The second big thing that happened with the library system is we started adding a bunch of new branches, but didn't add a bunch of new staff. And even though we all talk a lot about we're not going to replace staff, we're not going to put volunteers in where staff should be paid, we started implementing some really tight policies around volunteers coming in and supporting those branches that didn't have the staff capacity yet because the funding hadn't happened. And that got everybody really excited. And they learned that volunteers can be counted on. Volunteers can do the work when trained properly. So all of a sudden, and the eyes went open and it was like, oh, this isn't such a bad thing. We can do this. So those are my 2 tipping points.
So interesting. And I was just doing a training with another group this morning and talking about culture shift and recognizing what are the barriers. And Wendy, you talk about, people didn't know if they could trust and rely on volunteers to follow through. And there needs to be an urgency and a real need. That's all part of shifting the culture. And a big piece of that is, as we talk about in the Service Enterprise Initiative and in change management, that it's about, again, urgency. It's not just why make a change, but why make a change now? Like, what's in it for me? So maybe you could each talk just a little bit, or if one of you wants to dive in with this first, what did you do to help make that case, to explain what the benefits are? Because ultimately we're talking about people changing behaviors, people being willing to share their workload or engage a volunteer in a program in a way that's different. So what were some of the things you did to help make that case and describe the urgency, the why now part of it?
Sure, I'll start. A big thing, and I'm sure a lot of folks on the call can relate to this, is a big thing is your frontline staff having the rose and thorn effect with volunteers, right? Like you have that one employee that had a terrible experience with a volunteer and they don't want volunteers or they don't want to train them or work with them. And then you'll have the volunteer that's like, or the staff that says volunteers can do no wrong and they don't want to coach them and everyone's great and we let the powers be, right? So one of the things I did to really show that we needed to make this shift to being more strategic was to sit with those folks. Again, with my background, I went and rode alongside animal control officers. I sat at the front desk with our customer service folks. I've gone to our libraries and I've sat in our senior centers. And so seeing that day to day of what those employees are up against, because Wendy brought a great point earlier of, oh gosh, we don't want volunteers to take our jobs. I like to explain that volunteers are an extension of what our team is doing. They can further reach into the community because of what our staff are able to do thanks to the support of the volunteers. So it's a huge benefit to have them. And by having that front line in person, they could meet me. I wasn't this scary person out in the world. And really talking to them and seeing what they're up against to understand the why behind the hesitation really helped to make that case, because those are the ones that when the supervisors and the directors say, it sounds like a great idea, they're going to go back to their team, right? They're going to go back and say, well, what do you think? And so to learn those roles and to understand better of what they're up against and what their challenges are really helped me build that credibility piece to make that shift.
Nice. Wendy, do you have anything to add?
I do. And I love the way you said, we're here to support. We're not here to replace, because we're going to extend that. And that was one of the big messages that I put out there, because I went and visited every single branch during the branch visit, during their, monthly meetings with all staff. And I started introducing myself, because they didn't know me from anything but an email address. So they got to know who I was, and they got to understand what the passion that I have for volunteers is all about, value and making their lives better. And I gave them this giant list of, here are all the things that a volunteer can do in your branch. So I had done that same homework. I didn't get to ride in animal control cars. I'm sad now. But it gave me a chance to say, look, you may not have had the time to do the brainstorming about how a volunteer can be part of your team, but here's a list to get you started in that conversation. And I left that as a moment with each manager to say, use this list, have a conversation, put a bulletin board listing up there and have people write down what would they do with a volunteer if they had extra help, so that the branch and the branch staff, everyone was involved in how a volunteer could expand their ability to provide services to our patrons and our guests. So I really worked hard on that. And then once I figured out who my ally was, that branch manager who said, "Oh my gosh, this is the greatest thing ever," I just glued myself to that person, because it was important to me to say to them, what is it that you want to achieve? What are your goals? And then I piloted, because pilot is like gold. I piloted both a group activity, which they never ever thought they'd do. And I also sat with them while they were interviewing new volunteers, worked through all those steps, and got their volunteer program up and happily running before I said, all right, 24 other branches, let's do this thing. Because I used that ally. And anytime that person was in a branch manager meeting, if they were in a supervisory meeting, if they were talking to their upper leadership, they were always talking about, we did this volunteer thing. You can't believe this group came and they assembled 50,000 things, whatever the thing was that day. So having that ally and having that pilot is really what put the final stitches in for me about how are we going to make this work for all of our library system.
Tell us just briefly, what is the group activity? Do you mean it was like a group service project, or what? Just unpack that so we have an image.
Sure. The group activity, for us, group activities are no more than 3 to 4 hours. And what we did, this is crazy, I'm going to call it creek stomping. We had, I know, too much fun, right? You wouldn't think about creek stomping in a library.
Oh, no.
We have a library branch that is shares a property line with a railroad track, and the railroad track is elevated, and the railroad track joins with our property in what we are going to call a creek. Most people would call this a ditch, but we're going to call it a creek because creek stomping sounds a whole much better than ditch stomping. So what had been happening at this branch was anytime that creek got too much water in it, it would overflow into our parking lot, and that would make it uncomfortable and inconvenient for our patrons to get out of their car and get into the branch. We also discovered after our first creek stomp activity that there were all kinds of interesting things in the creek. So we might find a mattress, we might find a shopping cart, we found an altar, we found all kinds of interesting things in that creek, all of which were causing the backlog of water to prevent people to get into the parking lot to get out of their cars. Even more so because I live in Indiana, it freezes here. So all that water was freezing and causing ice on the parking lot. So we took a group of 40 people, which my branch manager at the time thought I was crazy. And for 3 to 4 hours, they came out, they cleaned the creek, they stomped around in their big waders, they picked up trash, they moved stuff into a dumpster.
Got it.
Partnered with our landscaping crew, and they came through and they cut all the brush. So we got all the brush out of the way for safety. And
team building activity.
Team building all around.
Okay.
And all the little kids can now sit inside the library and watch the trains go by. And we have a safer parking lot.
Got it. Interesting.
So, yeah. Creek stomping. Come to the library.
Who knew? Right. Who knew?
Right.
So an interesting theme that both of you mentioned was meeting your colleagues where they're at. And I don't mean that figuratively. You did it quite literally. Wendy, you went to all these different branches. Sarah, you went to different departments and experienced the work in different ways, which is all about building trust and building champions. You were calling them allies, Wendy. I'd love to highlight, we're going to integrate some questions here, heads up to the panel. A question from Karen that seems quite relevant to this discussion, which is, Did you find that staff were resistant to give away work to volunteers? Karen's in an education department that's very protective of their roles, but that department is what volunteers most want to be involved in. So, anyone open to
Yeah.
diving into this? Go for it.
Yes. So I experienced actually both ends of that spectrum. I had folks who wanted to give all of their work away, and it was all the things that they didn't want to do. And so I had to have that conversation, which I'm sure a lot of people on the call can relate to, of like, okay, volunteers aren't just to take the things that you don't like to do. And then on the other hand of the spectrum, I had folks that were very guarded. And really, really briefly, I'll just give an example. So I'm going to go back to our animal services for a moment, but we have a low cost vaccine clinic that we do. And one of the roles in that vaccine clinic for our citizens to bring their pets in is to do the data entry. So, folks are coming in for rabies vaccines, right? Which a lot of times folks are doing because they need it for their rental agreements or things like that. So it's very important. And we had staff that was really resistant to giving volunteers the ability to have access to our data system. And that was just, oh my goodness, very scary, very, very scary. And what we found was folks were resistant because they were, well, how are they going to understand the system? They're volunteers. They can't possibly understand a data system. And B, it's confidential information. Oh my goodness, what are we doing? Handing over, addresses and phone numbers. So the two ways we combated that was we were strategic. There's some roles that are skills based, right? And then there's some roles that are a little bit more open. And we were really strategic about which volunteers we brought on for that role. We found a lot of retired nurses who understood medical software, and B, understood the confidentiality piece. And so we were able to have interviews and bring on folks. And the minute that they saw what that could bring to the table and lighten the load for our vet techs was a complete light bulb moment. Because then all of a sudden that trust came into the factor, right? There was no, oh my gosh, this is for nefarious reasons. They're going to come in and take our system and hack it. And so we had to baby step it to get there, but taking that burden off of doing all the data entry and having to scan in all the paperwork after shot clinic was turning into surgeries taking longer and other things. So finding that piece of let's give a little bit of trust first, right? Let's try something. And let's see if we can maybe it's not a role where we just open it for everyone. Maybe it's a role where we look strategically for that person and we have a position description that represents that. And I think that goes a long way with showing, sometimes folks just hear the word volunteer and they think you're just going to let anybody in and give them full access to all the things, right? But I think that starting small with that really helped to build that trust. And then once they saw it, other departments started catching on, and it was a lot easier to go in and have those conversations.
Nice. Wendy, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you said it exactly correctly, because that is the same kind of situation that I was in, where instead of it being, I don't want to give it away, this is what I'm trained to do. And I don't want to give away what I'm trained to do. You would think volunteers could come and read to kids in the library. And the answer is no, you can't. That's what youth librarian, juvenile librarians are trained to do. And that's the fun part of their job. So what can we do to make that fit? So you did the baby steps, and I love that because I have baby steps in my answers later.
Yeah.
So it's all about
great minds, Wendy, great minds.
Little teeny bites.
That's right. So speaking of great minds, heads up to Wendy and Sarah, we're going to just do a slight switch in sequence of the next two questions, because Mary asked a question here about do we have a template for a document that helps staff think strategically about starting a volunteer opportunity or program? And so I'm actually going to take that one as a lead into my question to you all about training staff, because training staff, I mean, that's really what we're talking about, formally, informally, shifting the culture so that staff are equipped. So I'll just say, Mary, great question. And we good? We good? Okay, hopefully we're good. I heard an uh-oh. So to Karen from Better Impact, I will send you after this this webinar is done, we at VQ have we call it a role assessment form. It's a conversation guide that can help you have a conversation with fellow staff members about, is this a role, if you want this volunteer opportunity, is this a role that's strategic? Does it pass Beth's? Would anyone in their right mind ever want to do this test? And what do we need in order to make sure that this would be a volunteer that's supported, has the training, someone's dedicated to this? So my answer to you, Mary, is I have a form that might be able to help with that, and we'll ensure it gets sent out following this session. But it's all part of the larger question of training. So what role has staff training played in your efforts? We're going to send it out to everyone, Jenny. We'll send that as a follow-up to everyone with the other handouts. So Wendy, what role has training of staff played in your efforts?
It's critical. Everything from just the casual elevator conversation, when they see a whole glob of people show up in a building and I happen to be there, they all know, okay, Wendy's here. It must be that volunteer thing. But having that conversation about, hey, they're here to do this fun thing, and I'm going to take them upstairs, or they're going to go to the conference room, or they're going to go to the creek. Just that quick little snippet that says, this is what they're here for, and this is what they're going to do. And then they're going to be gone in 3 to 4 hours. Having that informal education is just as important as having the formal education. And that formal education for me is more at the volunteer coordinator. Remember, I'm a distributed system, so I have a volunteer coordinator at each branch. My volunteer coordinators, first off, they have to say they want to be a volunteer coordinator at their branch. There's no magic fairy wand that taps them on the head and says, you're it. They have to want to do that role, because it's in addition to all their other jobs, right? It's just another hat. So when I know who that new person's going to be, they get one-on-one training from me that's over 2 hours long. They learn all about the policies and procedures of running the volunteer engagement activities. So they know what the legal requirements are. They know what all the paperwork looks like. We role play and practice an interview, because many of my folks that are volunteer coordinators have not been in leadership roles before. So I am the frontline. Hey, let's talk about what leadership looks like. Let's talk about what happens when someone comes to your branch and they smell funny, and you have to talk about, hey, maybe we need to talk about why you smell funny and you're being outside of our policies about being offensive and disruptive to our patrons, right? So we talk about all of those things. And then all along the way, I'm there to support them. And they know that, because they are getting messages from me. They're getting reminders from me. They're getting that, hey, do you want me to come and do the first interview so you can see it done? Do you want me to just sit in the corner? So my volunteer coordinators are my best defense, right, to making sure that our program is going smoothly. But I have to train them, and I have to give them what are the fence lines, what are the rules and regulations of how our organization has decided to make volunteer engagement happen. So it's super important.
Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, I think the only 2 things I would add to that, because I completely agree with Wendy, is that, a lot of folks, this may be their first time ever interacting with a volunteer. And so the 2 things I would say with staff training is it's strategic and it's continuous. Those are the 2 things. It's not a one-time welcome to the team, let's talk about volunteers. If your staff is doing a quarterly all hands meeting where everyone comes to the table, ask for 5 minutes to give a quick once over about what's the state of the state with your volunteers. If there is a cookout or anything like that, what can we do to include the volunteers in that? Because that's, again, engagement outside of just their regular day-to-day working alongside those volunteers. And then from a strategic standpoint, I always look at, if we're doing special events or we're doing something, I challenge the leaders in those departments to ask themselves, how is this going to impact volunteers? Because if it is, then I challenge them to have a question, a chat with their staff on what does that look like for their volunteers. Because Sarah
Nice.
can't be everywhere, just like Wendy, who's like in a central, and then she's got the volunteer coordinators. Same, I can't always be, although sometimes I try. I'll be at a senior center in the morning. I'll be with libraries in the afternoon, and then I'm spending my evening doing a ride along with an ACO, animal control officer. So strategic and continuous are the two that I would say for staff training, because they're the ones interacting with those volunteers and doing the work.
And interestingly, I really met and began working with each of you, well, in different contexts, but training of fellow staff members is what bumped you all up in my mind. Is these women are masters at that, and not just in the 2 hour training, but in this continuous informal mentoring, coaching. Let's integrate messages into regular weekly or monthly emails with a reminder of what does it feel like for a volunteer to show up? Are you welcoming them? All sorts of little nuanced, but digestible tidbits to enhance everyone's skills in volunteer engagement. So there are tremendously wonderful questions coming up. I see them all. We're going to get to them, but I'm going to start moving us through kind of the rest of your strategy as an organization so that we can get to your personal professional journey, which is also what a lot of the questions are focusing on. So very briefly, we're on a call with Better Impact. How has technology played a role in your journey from program to strategy? So little brief, Sarah, and then Wendy.
Yeah, so really quickly on technology, I am very fortunate in the county. We have a business development analyst, and he keeps me on track because volunteer leaders, we love to tell stories and we love to bring emotion into a lot of what we do and the feel good, right? And he will always have a question when I say, oh, well, gosh, at least half of my volunteers would do this. And he always asks, is that a feeling or do you have data to prove it? And that really took me aback because at first I was like, oh my gosh, my feelings are data. But no, I can't put that on a budget proposal. So I have really leveraged technology and it doesn't have to be, the next latest, greatest Power BI, statistics goodness knows I am not huge on technology. I continue to try to improve, but I have found that even basic reports to be able to back up what I'm saying and brings that credibility. A lot of leadership still is learning what a volunteer professional is, whether that's a coordinator, we have so many names. But to be able to bring data thanks to technology to back up what I'm saying and verify and bring that credibility is huge. So I'm a big fan of leveraging technology and continuing to train myself to get better at it.
Right. Wendy, what do you want to add to that?
I've been in organizations where it was paper and sticky notes. And I have been in this organization where I pushed the envelope in budgeting to get to an amazing product that allows me to do reporting and allows me to really focus in on excellent customer service during the onboarding process because we were losing people. They would come into an email or they would come into these places and we didn't have a central location for all of our data. And by having that central location, not only is our onboarding better, but our communication with our volunteers is better because we now have everything that we need to know about them. We have notes about them. We have where have they been, how many hours, what other activities might they like to do. Having a robust product has been life-changing for not only myself, but my whole team and all of the volunteer coordinators.
Nice. So I'm going to ask, how would you describe your volunteer engagement strategies today? And are there recommendations you would weave into this for anyone who's trying to get, further along in their journey the way that you have? So Sarah, can you start, share a little bit about where your organization is and any recommendations to try and reap the same benefits?
Yeah, I would say now we actually have a strategy for volunteers, which is pretty exciting. But I would say a huge benefit of that is, like I said earlier, is We are standardizing where it makes sense. We are reducing so many of the customizations where it makes sense. And a big benefit of that is, we are public servants. We are here. Any organization that has volunteers because there's a mission, right? There's something we're doing for our community. And having an actual effective engagement strategy with your volunteers allows you to have tenure. You will see that volunteers will stick around. Wendy talked earlier about folks, I call it the volunteer sieve, right? We bring them in and they go right back out. Whether that's because we lost their paperwork or they had a terrible experience onboarding, whatever that looks like. And that's time and effort, and morale really for staff and fellow volunteers. So to have a strategy, we now have, in fact, a logo. We call ourselves the VIPs. So you're a volunteer in Pasco. And it's really exciting to see that. We're actually launching billboards soon, which I'm like so excited for. And I would say a big recommendation I would give is understanding your leadership's currency. And by that, what I mean is if you have a director that's big on numbers, you don't have to be the number expert, but find those pieces that they're going to really look at. If it's the budget, right? If it's that bottom line, gosh, what can we show to say that the volunteers, because we're effectively engaging them and they're sticking around and doing XYZ, we're able to bring this back to our mission, right? Or they've brought in X number of philanthropy dollars. If you have a leader that looks at those feel goods and they want that reputation out into the community, you have some of those in mind, and put yourself out there to do that. It's okay to insert yourself and ask like, hey, can I be a part of that meeting? Can I come to that call? Can I insert myself in this? Worst case scenario, they say no, and you're no worse off, right? But putting yourself out there and having those things, learning the currency of your leadership so that you can tailor your what you're trying to get across is huge. And that really will help, again, with that credibility piece of bringing why there is strategy behind volunteerism. And it's not just a nice to have or feel good.
Nice. Thank you. Wendy, what's the state of the state in Indianapolis?
The state of the state is looking really good. We have now that every one of my branches is utilizing volunteers in some form or another, whether that's just a group every year, or if it's individuals that come in, or if it's our supported volunteers that come in from Easter Seals or Noble Center or the high school program that's looking at career development. Every one of my branches is engaging volunteers. And I have some departments that are too, which is also amazing because I never thought I'd get to that level. So it's really looking good. I can't emphasize enough how important those pilots are, because there are some new things that I would like to do. And I'm going to use that same model to pilot that new thing I want to do to see if I can get that ally to start talking to all their peers to make those things much better. So I would,
thanks.
Take baby steps.
That's great. So hopefully everyone on this call, and from all the very rich array of questions, I think it's true, you're getting inspired and want to know not just how can we do this strategically, but what about the personal professional development. In fact, someone asked, Keisha asked, I'd like to learn more about higher level management skills and methods. I'm currently a volunteer coordinator with a BA and no specific management training. So what are some suggestions to further Keisha's position? And that relates to what we wanted to also share as kind of our last line of questioning before we go to the big Q&A. Each of you is a CVA. It's not on your name. It should be Sarah Sukhram, CVA, Wendy Johnson, CVA, Certified Volunteer Administrator. It's an international credential. You also each play significant roles in the field beyond your position with your own organization. So tell us about your leadership opportunities you've acquired, or I know you both created, and share how that's benefited you. And on this theme, Karen from Better Impact just shared the link in the chat for the PDU credits for this webinar if you are seeking to get accredited or renew your accreditation, your credentialing as a CVA. So Sarah, Sarah, you start and we'll go to Wendy.
Okay. So I earned my CVA a few years back, and I really, again, just inserted myself. I happened to hear leadership talk about there was some extra money, which never happens, in our education account, and it could only be used on education. And so I made it a point to create a whole slide deck as to why I should use that towards earning my CVA and bringing that credentialing to our animal services. But outside of that, I'm a huge volunteer with Alive, which is the Association of Leaders in Volunteer Engagement. I am the co-lead for our COP subcommittee, which is Communities of Practice. So Alive is basically for anyone that's a volunteer engagement professional, regardless of industry. And our communities of practices are basically little groups that get together based on industry or type of volunteering platform. I also sit on the programs committee and support the annual impact awards. I'm on the judging committee for that. And I am a part of our summit committee because Alive is doing their first in-person summit next year. And so a couple things as far as like professionally and pushing myself, because I am by nature an introvert, believe it or not. And I'm very much in my own little world. I like to be behind the scenes and highlight others and what they're doing. And so I would say first, look at what your organization currently offers as far as trainings. You know, being part of the county, I'm fortunate that we have a training group that does different things, from whether it's Lean Six Sigma, which is a great opportunity, to project management trainings, etc. So look what's already in the organization that you're at. Outside of that, partner with different associations. Alive is a great example. There's another one called Nav Plug, which is for volunteer programs that are in government. I'm also a member of that. But once you're around those folks that are within that volunteer engagement professional, they will tell you different things or offer you, just like these webinars, there's different things that come across and opportunities, and put yourself out there. It's huge to learn. And the more I have found that I've learned, as I said earlier, going and being with the different departments, the more I've learned stepping outside of just volunteer engagement and learning from others as to what they do. That's how I have found my leadership style being molded, because I've learned along the ways of, oh gosh, what do you do in a situation like that? Or what can I have offered to me? So putting yourself out there, learning outside of just volunteer engagement, and you'd be surprised how you start developing skills you didn't even know that you could tap into.
The phrase putting yourself out there is a great lead into Wendy, who has been known to put herself out there too. Wendy, what do you want to add?
Well, first of all, I have to say introverts unite, because I too am an introvert. You'd never know that from the outside, but today I'll take a nap after this to recharge. Beth is alluding to my community of practice, which isn't really my of its own. During COVID, I was feeling isolated. I was feeling like I didn't have a clue what we were going to do with library volunteers, and I needed help, and I needed support, and I needed a shoulder to cry on. So during the first few months of COVID, I pulled together and put myself out there in every chat I could find, every webinar, every discussion. I kept saying, if you're a library volunteer coordinator, if you're a library volunteer, if you're involved with libraries in any way, come talk to me. Let's meet. And I laugh about it because that's 5 years ago, and our group is still meeting on a regular basis. It's US, Canada, anybody else is welcome. We're using the same Zoom link, which is also kind of crazy. So I would have to say, find your people, because if you've got, in this role, we tend to be very siloed. We tend to be the one and only volunteer coordinator. We tend to be the one and only person who's pounding on the drum saying, volunteers are amazing, let's bring them to our organization. And sometimes we need that support. And sometimes we need other ideas, and we love the opportunity to get together in this library volunteer leader group. So if you're a library, email me and I will get you the link. My shameless plug. See, that's how I did it.
We're already getting messages in the chat saying,
Yeah,
how
like,
do I get in that?
how do I get into that?
Yeah.
So it's amazing. Just email or, just reach out.
We'll make it happen.
Yeah,
we're
we'll
good.
make it happen. The other thing that I will have to say is when I started in this role 20 some years ago, I had no clue. Things have changed a lot with our profession, but I hooked up with my local AVA, Dovia, whatever your area refers to it. And I just started going, and I just started standing up and saying, I don't know what you're talking about. What are you talking about? I just know I want to be one of you. And through that, I got all kinds of great examples. I got my first job because I attended my local AVA. And I stepped out and said, okay, I can do leadership. I can be the member at large on the AVA committee. These are all my friends. It's okay. And then I was vice president, and then it was president, and then all of a sudden membership. So all of those experiences with my AVA, which was a very safe place, gave me more leadership experience that I could back up credibility with my own job, right? My former life, I had lots of leadership, but I didn't have it in nonprofit. I didn't have it in volunteer leadership. So join your AVA, find your people.
I love it. Join your AVA, self-advocate. AVA, Association of Volunteer Administrators, or ALIVE, or if you're in healthcare, it's what AHVRP became in Barrel Institute. Consider accreditation, getting your certification, CVA or CABS if you're in healthcare. I know we have some hospice folks on. So all great ways to professionalize. We have 7 minutes. We're going to do speed round with questions. Speed round, ladies. And then I want to make sure we wrap up with a few final thoughts, resources. We'll pull things up on the screen again. So speed round. Angela, hi Angela. Angela asks, curious if leadership above each of you has changed a lot, or have you had pretty consistent leadership that you've been able to convince about volunteer value?
Perpetual change.
Perpetual change. And Sarah, what was yours?
Same leadership, but I have changed their mindset on volunteers.
Nice. Drew asks, besides in-person visits, how do you stay connected with the frontline staff who are supervising and supporting volunteers? Do you have a virtual community, like a Teams channel or a Slack channel, monthly newsletter, community of practice? How do you do it? Because you can't be running around everywhere all the time.
Well, Sarah can.
Right, Sarah, that's true. She's a runner.
Yeah, we do have a Teams channel. In fact, my libraries department has a Teams channel specifically for our technology. And we oftentimes have we have a once a month call with anyone that's overseeing volunteers. They can jump on, and I have a topic for each month so that they know what we're going to talk about for who wants to join on that.
And I do every 6 months, I do a mini retreat that's a 3-hour Zoom/Teams discussion about all the new things that are happening in volunteer leadership and all things that are happening within our library system that are new and different. So I have a chance then to meet with all of my folks. We record it and we load it up to Teams so anyone who can't make it can watch it.
Nice. I'm going to go to the very first question because I don't want that person to feel like we ignored it this whole time. At this organization, there's a ton of people who want to volunteer in small capacities. I'm assuming that means episodic short-term, with only about 20 long-term volunteer positions. What are some creative ways that use these potential volunteers? I also have a short answer to this, but let's start with you all.
I'll jump in. I grew up in a household that had a job jar. And the job jar was really a big giant pickle jar, and that anyone in the house could write down a thing that needed to get done. Mostly it was for my dad. So like, can you fix the squeak on the screen door? I am encouraging all of my branch coordinators to create a job jar, whatever that looks like, so that any volunteer who walks in and needs 4 hours for National Honor Society or just wants to help for a day can pull something out of that job jar, they can go do that activity. It's impactful, it's important, and it's part of what our staff needs.
I agree
Sarah?
with
Love it.
Wendy. I think the only thing I would add to that is making sure that for those specific volunteers, because it is a shorter time span, to make that process as easy for them to onboard and get their hours signed off on as possible. Whatever that looks like, if it's they have a one sheet form, if they have a quick way that they go on and get their hours verified, create a process specifically for that. So that way they think next time they have it to come back. And they go, gosh, it was so easy to come to that place and just get my couple hours in or my 4 hours, whatever that looks like.
And I would add to that, to building on that, structure those one-time opportunities so that they bridge to future opportunities. You may not have as many ongoing volunteers, but you may be able to create more serial volunteers, repeat volunteers, if you ensure that you have people built into the structure of your one-day events to do that. So many great questions. I am going to quickly share my screen again so that I can make sure that our contact information is out there, and that we can get some final advice from you experts about, what would you share with participants for them to consider as they seek to lead their organization to a more strategic approach for volunteer engagement. And I will let whoever wants to jump in first.
Sarah.
Okay. My one piece of advice very quickly is to be you are your best advocate for your volunteers, right? And as Wendy mentioned earlier, sometimes we are a team of one, oftentimes. So put yourself out there to go to the other departments, see what they're doing, because you will be the one that will be able to link what they're doing with volunteers. They're not going to be in that mindset. You are. So put yourself out there. Go do open houses with your other departments. Put yourself into their departments and just go hang with them and see what they've got going on so that you can insert where it looks like you can have strategic volunteer partnerships.
And I put the lens of how can volunteers help and help teach your staff how to put that lens on. I'm working really hard stuffing envelopes. Well, why aren't we doing volunteers for this? I want to interject that thought process of, could a volunteer be doing this work so I could go do the other work and extend our services?
I love it. We could go, oops, I went in the wrong direction. We could go on. I think this was where the contact information was supposed to be. I'll leave that for just a moment. I may have had the wrong slide up, but you can find Sarah and Wendy on LinkedIn. I think Wendy also put her contact information in the chat. You can always email me at info@VQ Strategies. And I see there's some chat. I will take the leap and just say, I'll share the strategy information with Karen to send out as well. It's an article about developing a volunteer engagement strategy for your organization. It's not a full template, but it gives you the recipe for it. A few just final housekeeping pieces. We have at VQ Strategies a ton more resources that you can download as well. And Better Impact does also. So please make sure that you utilize their resources. I know that you all share my gratitude to Wendy and Sarah for taking their time out of their busy day to share their experience. And I hope that we will all see you out in the community at a live summit and our communities of practice, in our work together, and on future Better Impact webinars. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.